Welcome back, those of you who are on spring break. If you left and we were in Isaiah and you came back when we were in Isaiah again, you're welcome because we're almost to the end of it. We're in the home stretch of Isaiah here. We have what? How dare you? Take it back. Okay. Home stretch of Isaiah. We talked about 1 through 39 being mostly concerned with the threat of Assyria and a lot of judgment oracles there. 40 through 55 has to do with the exiles. And then in 40 through 55, we start this comfort language, comfort for my people, comfort for those who have heard everything that has been going wrong and even everything that they have done wrong. Comfort coming not from the things that they are now starting to get right, but comfort coming from the fact that God is still for them. He is riding on the clouds for their salvation. He's making a way in the desert for them to come to Him. He's clearing every obstacle out of the way. And then when we get to 56 through 66, we get to this big, huge imagery and language that we've been building to. A lot of the things, especially in the 60s, tie back to Isaiah's call and Isaiah's judgment oracles against Israel, even starting in chapters 1 through 5. We'll talk about that tonight. But we're starting all these callbacks to see where God has taken His people from and what He is calling them to. And so when we look at this big, huge language of salvation and the brightness of the light that is shining in the darkness and the things that God is doing, not just for Jerusalem and His people, but through the servant and the servant's work, the thing that He does for the entirety of humanity, for the universality of creation, we have this framework in mind that there is a people on earth that is completely bereft of any faculty to deal with this sin problem themselves. And there is a way that God has made for that problem to be taken care of through the work of His servant. And that is something that is worth rejoicing over. And so when we get to chapters 60 through 62, we are again displaying the inability of God's people to deal with their own sin, reminding them of God's gracious action on their behalf, and showing them what it is, even though they are unable to do that themselves, showing them what it is, this side of that salvation and deliverance, to live into that very same faithful, God-fearing lifestyle after they have been called out of sin, out of darkness, out of wrath, into life. And so we'll continue that as we get to chapter 62 today. We'll have one more message in Isaiah, and then we'll talk about the servant songs. We're going to do a series on the servant songs after that. So get ready for Isaiah in the home stretch, and we'll talk about that once we get started. When we did our student night, we did our another question night with our students tonight. One of the questions they asked is, how do I keep from cursing? How do I keep from cussing? And I said, step number one, thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for being here. And a lot of you came a long way. A lot of you here from other places. That's great. One of the things I said is stop driving in Beaumont. Because we are keenly aware of the things that trip us up and the things that get in our way. Once we get to the 60s of Isaiah, though, we kind of have our mind, our thoughts, our desires rearranged around the fact that there is something going on in our hearts and in our lives that's worth celebrating. So let's look at chapter 62, starting in verse 1. We're only going to do 5 verses. Don't clap. We're only going to do 5 verses. Chapter 62, starting in verse 1. For Zion's sake I will not keep silent, and for all Jerusalem's sake I will not be quiet, until her righteousness goes forth as brightness, and her salvation as a burning torch. The nations shall see your righteousness, and all the kings your glory, and you shall be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord will give. And you shall be a crown of beauty in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of your God. You shall no more be termed forsaken, and your land shall no more be termed desolate. But you shall be called, my delight is in her, and your land married. For the Lord delights in you, and your land shall be married. For as a young man marries a young woman, so shall your sons marry you. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. Father, as we look at a text that very easily calls to mind remembrances of celebrations and rejoicing, God, I pray that we would be centered on what it is that we are celebrating. The fact that you have reached into our broken existence, pulled us out of a life leading to despair, and showed us something new, something beautiful, something glorious in what you've done in our lives. And you call us to that very same action to those around us. To your Son's name we pray. Amen. So I have a picture from a movie, of course, to see if you know what this movie is. The first one that guesses it gets respect. Not Terminator. Not Terminator 2. Not Terminator 2 is not the full title. Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Thank you, Devin. Terminator 2 Judgment Day. So, so you did get it right? No, it's not Terminator. It's a completely different movie. I'll talk about it after this. So who do we see here? Who plays Terminator? Arnold Schwarzenegger. Who's giving him a haircut? Sarah Connor. Yeah, Sarah Connor in the movie, but her name's Linda Hamilton in real life. That's who plays the person. So in Terminator 2, they come to this point where they have to access his CPU, and he's a Terminator, he's a robot, and so there's this thing that they have to pull out of his head. But they didn't want to kill Arnold Schwarzenegger by pulling something out of his head, so this is a dummy. That's not really a real person. What gets pulled out of his head is this big chunk that would be what is part of Arnold Schwarzenegger's brain, where they have that CPU. So how is this a dummy, but Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton is in the mirror? It's because that's not a mirror. This is Eddie Furlong, right? That's John Connor. That's somebody else standing over there mirroring his shoulder. This is Linda Hamilton pulling out the chunk that is in this dummy, this thing that they made just so they could shoot the back of it. And that is Linda Hamilton's twin. Linda Hamilton has a twin. It's not a mirror. They had to practice this scene over and over and over again of her taking a tool and bringing it up, of her talking and moving her mouth but not making any noise. Just so, this is before everything was like CGI, and now they would just be like, oh yeah, just do it on a computer. But back then they had to come up with this that we didn't know that, right? Who knew that in this room? Besides Blaine. Oh, of course I knew. Okay. We didn't know because we can't tell twins apart usually. I grew up with a lot of friends that were twins. I knew personally 3 sets of twins and 2 sets of triplets. And so I had a really hard time telling everybody apart, and they knew that. Everybody in those sets knew that people couldn't tell them apart, so they would mess with people. But you know who could always tell them apart? Mom. Mom could tell them apart all the time, and I don't know why. Some of them looked exactly alike, and the mom of all of those kids could always tell them apart, no matter what was going on. They could always tell them apart. Sometimes it was from personality. Sometimes they looked differently somehow, but I couldn't see it. And this, she's got a twin, but there are differences in the way that they look. There are differences, especially in the way that they act and behave. One of them became an actor, one of them didn't. But a lot of times when we talk about the communal nature of these things, and we talk about especially the communal nature of our salvation and what God has done on behalf of all those who are saved, we can lose the individual nature of God's care and love and protection of us and redemption of us personally. We get a very personal message here in communal terms, but a very personal message to those who have experienced some real tragic circumstances. We look at this picture and we see, oh, that's Linda Hamilton in a mirror, but somebody can tell them apart. Somebody knows, right? We might look at this room and not know everybody in it, but the Lord is concerned and deeply concerned with each and every one of us and our relationship to Him. One of the things that when we go to Tanzania, I just got back from Tanzania recently, One of the things when we go to Tanzania that we really have to drive home is the individual nature of your relationship with Christ. It takes a personal response from you. It also takes a personal effort on your part to continue in discipleship and continue to follow. You're not just a Christian because your village became a Christian. You don't have a relationship with Christ just because everybody in your family decided to have a relationship with Christ. There comes a point where that salvation, that gift, that grace becomes your own. And so even though we're talking in these big communal images here, we are still talking very personally about a God who knows us, who shows us not only what we have been, but where we can be because of this. He is a God who sees us, who sees us where we're at and desires not that we stay there, who sees us in the midst of whatever struggle we're in and desires not that we stay in it. That might be difficult for some of us to hear that have been in those troubles for a long period of time. But his desire ultimately is for us to experience redemption, reconciliation, right standing not just in justification, but in the fact that we know who we belong to. He sees us as we were. He sees us what we can be. He sees not only that, but what his Son has done on behalf of us. Let's look in verse 1 of chapter 62. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake, I will not be quiet. Who's speaking here? We got a couple options. Obviously, if we're talking about the book of Isaiah, these words at some point were words that were placed on the prophet's lips, and so some people see the prophet's words here. For Zion's sake, I will not stop prophesying on behalf of her. That is Jerusalem. Zion, read Jerusalem, read a return of the physical exiles, but also a return of the spiritual exiles, which would include us, a return from sin to God. For Zion's sake, I will not be quiet. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not be quiet. I think we're right to see also the image of God speaking on behalf of us. God not wanting any longer to leave us where we're at in all the things that have been detailed in Isaiah up to this point, even the silence of God in some instances when we're thinking about other countries coming in and literally carrying off the people of Israel to exile. Lamentations, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and even Ezekiel begin to speak about the horror of that event. And it seems at times that God has been silent, that there has been even an abandonment. How could this happen? Why did this happen? Isaiah begins to answer that in chapters 1 through 39. But he doesn't stop at 39. He continues to go into what God is doing. I will no longer be silent. I will no longer stop. Some people see I'll no longer be quiet. Some people see the work of the servant talked about here. If we're talking about God's voice or the servant's voice, it's all a part of the same plan. I will no longer be silent. I will not be quiet until what? This is my point. Her righteousness goes forth as brightness. That is not just her right standing with me, but her blamelessness, her purity, her connection to me that makes her different in the world and thus makes her a blessing to the nations, which is one of the promises of the covenant, and her salvation as a burning torch. Love Lord of the Rings, right? Lord of the Rings, the last Lord of the Rings movie when like Gondor's in trouble, right? It's the city where the guy is eating all the, like, there's a close-up of his face and he's eating all that stuff, right? That's like one of the gross. There's nothing really happens in it that would give it like an R rating or something, but I think just because of that, it should be an R rating because it's so gross. Like tomatoes are falling, like a whole tomato falls off the guy's face. That guy, when they finally get the crazy guy out of the way and they're able to light the fire in Gondor, why do they light it? Somebody who's seen the movie. They light the fire in Gondor, and then you see off in the distance another fire lit. And you see off in the distance another fire lit. You see off in the distance another fire lit. And then Aragorn busts in and he's like, Gondor calls for aid. And the king from this other country says, and Rohan will answer, we will be the ones that go when they have called for aid to rescue them. Now, this is a separate image we see here, right? The burning light, the torch that leads is not to call for our own aid. It is to announce that we have been aided, that we have been delivered. Your salvation, the fact that you are no longer what you were and you have been brought into this new reality, goes forth as brightness, goes forth as a light shining. And the torch, the lead on that, the thing that sheds light in new areas when we are groping in the dark, is her salvation. He is speaking up. He is acting. I will make sure to do everything in my power to make sure that her righteousness, her salvation, leads the way for those around him. God's working in our lives is meant to be seen. The changes that devotion brings about in us is meant to be a very public thing, but starts from a personal, individual level. It makes us leaders. It makes us people that others want to come to with their question. It gives us a role in the grand scheme of God's salvation plan that looks a lot like priest and minister that we talked about in chapters 60 and 61. Ushering people in to God's presence. The God who has not been silent on behalf of us, the God who speaks up on our behalf, calls us to do the same, to not be silent, to go forth. Verse 2. Because of this, the nations shall see your righteousness. We've seen this idea over and over again in these 3 chapters. And all the kings your glory, and you shall be called a new name that the mouth of the Lord will give. All over Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, we have these renaming ceremonies. I've read a lot about Native American spirituality and mythology, and it's really interesting what they do with naming ceremonies. Say a famous Native American name that you know. Pocahontas, right? What does that mean? No, it's not the wind. You got that from a Disney movie. Paint with all the color. Pocahontas means playful one, and it's probably not the name that she was born with. Well, sorry, that's what it means. I didn't name her. What else? What's another Native American name that you know? What? Geronimo. Geronimo means the one who yawns. That's what Geronimo means, the one who yawns. Squanto, that's a good one. Squanto, which is from Tisquantum, which I guess, the people he was talking to, the best they could say was, your name's Squanto. Squanto means divine rage. Right? Squanto is this really helpful part of our Thanksgiving story, right? His name means divine rage, God being mad. What? Any other? Sitting bull. Well, sitting bull is the translation of sitting. Sitting bull means sitting bull. We know that one in English. Sacagawea, right? Sacagawea means bird woman. Bird woman. I don't think it's like crazy bird woman like we mean, like sitting on top of a building in Chicago and all the pigeons are all over her. I don't think that's what it means. It probably means somebody who likes birds, or I don't know, maybe it's like a Snow White thing, like she comes out of the teepee and it's like, oh, and all the birds. I don't know what it means. But that's what they decided to call her, bird woman. Now, Native American names work differently from our names. How do you get your name? From your parents, right? What? From the Bible? Okay, yeah. I was about to say, so you were born and your parents just laid you on the Bible, whichever one you, okay? Okay? How do we get our names? Our parents give them to us, right? And when do we get our names? Hopefully when we're born. Sometimes people wait a little. People do crazy things now. Sometimes people wait, but usually when you're born, you got a name. And so it has nothing to do usually with your personality or with things that you do or things that are about you. And every Native American naming ceremony, it has to do with something that someone has observed about them. And so as a community, they say, this is what we'll call you, Sitting Bull, because you're strong and you sit like a bull. This is what you call you, Crazy Horse, because, you got some really wild ideas. This is what we'll call you, Bird Lady, because I always see birds around you. And so it has to do something with their personality. And Native American scholars now have tried to track different tribes and what they say. Most tribal names of Native Americans, the communal name that they call themselves, just means humans, or human beings, or people. And so they are called people, but they have individual personalities that play out in their life. This is how you act, and so this is what you're called. Sometimes it's very complimentary. Sometimes it doesn't sound very complimentary to us, right? But it's just how it goes. That's the name you get. Now, we don't do anything like that, do we? We do. You have a name when you're born, but you have other names too. Every person in here has something that somebody else calls them that's not your name. It's not an insult, but it's not your name. What is it? It's a nickname, right? It's a nickname. It's some nickname that some of you are laughing right now because please don't say my nickname. It's a nickname, right? Somehow we've earned it, or somehow it's like a badge of honor. I had a nickname in high school, and it was Chops. And it's because I went to high school in the 90s, and everybody had those. If you see Seth Rogen early in his career, and he has those sideburns that go all the way down to here, right? I don't want to make fun of anybody, especially when I have the laugh that I do, but like that's the sideburns that I had very early on. I could grow facial hair before anybody else in my grade. So they're like, we're going to call you Chops. It's going to be cool. I was like, yeah, I loved it, right? I wanted people to call me Chops. I put it on my letter jacket. Now I look back and I'm like, oh man, you were so lame. You put something named after your facial hair on your letter jacket like a badge of honor, right? But that's how nicknames come about, right? It's something that's integral to your personality. We're about to see some new names that the Lord has given. There are names that our circumstances give us. There are names that we give ourselves. There are negative things that we want to tell ourselves all the time. But this is the way the Lord redirects it. He begins with this in verse 3. You shall be a crown of beauty in the hand of the Lord. Now this is taking something from chapter 1, the fading crown, like the fading crown of flowers that has become Israel's spiritual rejection and Israel's idolatry, yes, in the literal sense, but also idolatry of seeking after other things besides the Lord. They are fading like a crown of flowers would fade. Now you are a crown of beauty in the hand of the Lord. You are a royal diadem, another word for a crown or a smaller crown in the hand of your God. This royal type imagery and beauty that was once talked about as if it was gone has been restored. And it comes directly after we're talking about your new name. Verse 4. You shall no more be termed forsaken, and your land shall no more be termed desolate. Talking to the people likely when we're saying forsaken. Talking about the land of Israel when we say desolate. You are known as this, have been known as this, possibly earned an unfortunate nickname as this. Because a big bad king from another land destroyed everything that you held dear. Took away your friends and family. And you cried in the streets, where now is our God? You even called yourself forsaken, abandoned, left, deserted. You felt and maybe were in your own mind and your own heart alone. But that time is coming to an end. That label no longer has any claim over you. So stop using it yourself. Stop speaking oppression and subjugation over a reality that has been utterly changed. That's not your name. That's not who you are. And this is not where you're from. The place that you're from may no longer be called desolate. And I can just imagine like Israelites in the exile saying, "Hello, my name is Forsaken. I'm from Desolate. Where are you?" That's no longer how you think about yourself. It's no longer how you think about the origin of your life. Desolate, something that has been destroyed, utterly broken up. Instead, you shall be called, "My delight is in her, and your land married. For the Lord delights in you, and your land shall be married." Now we'll get to the translation that we have to do from that culture to our culture in a second here. But this is very reminiscent of other renaming sections of the Old Testament. Hosea, anybody remembers another prophetic book from the Old Testament? Amos. Others, Isaiah even has some weird names for his kids at the beginning of Isaiah. But Hosea especially is told to name his kids some things. Anybody remember what Hosea is told to name his kids? "You are not my people." Yeah, I can just imagine taking him to the park. "Where is you are not my people?" What else? Yeah, no mercy is one. So, yeah. No mercy, get over here. Jezreel is another one that has to do with some very specific things in Israel's history. But here's what happens. The naming of Jezreel, "not my people," "I'm not your God," "no mercy," are all reversed in Hosea chapter 1. Jezreel becomes a place that great things happen, that a great day of rejoicing is upon us, a reversal of fortune based on these names. No mercy becomes the opportunity for Yahweh to show mercy, the God of the Old Testament. "Not my people, not your God," is not the name that Israel retains. They are his people. He is their God. He has not forsaken them or left them desolate. "You shall no longer," as chapter 1 in Isaiah says, "have a country that lies desolate. You shall no longer have a vineyard that has been dislodged." Here's what shall happen. "You shall be called, my delight is in her, and your land shall be called Mary." Now, does anybody's Bible not translate those things? My delight is in her. It's a Hebrew word for that. Hepzibah, right? That's in your Bible. "You shall no longer be called what you have earned yourself. You shall be called, you shall be seen, you shall be known as, you shall be dealt with as if this is the truth. Because my delight is in you. You are not forsaken as a people, and your land shall be married." Now, there's other translations of that word, married. We're going to use marriage imagery, and we use marriage imagery of like a marriage celebration before this. By the time we get to verse 5, we'll definitely be there. But married can also have the sense of belonging. Of dwelling in. Your land will no longer be empty because I'm going to place you in it. You will belong. You'll be home. There have been several times in my life when I wasn't necessarily homeless, but I did not feel like I had a home. I didn't feel like I had people that cared about me. I didn't feel like I had a place that was my own. I was raised with 6 other people, that gets crowded. I went to college and had a lot of other roommates. That also gets crowded. And so I would go to all these places. It was very transitory for a long time in my life where I didn't feel like anywhere was home. Stayed with family for a while. That wasn't home. I came home to visit, and it's not home anymore, right? This isn't what I see as home. And so home for me began to be associated with a very close group of Christian people that I began to see as family. When I was with them, I was home. When I was in a place where I belonged, where I felt like the Lord had called me to and He was speaking life and truth into me. Well, we're not looking for a literal land right now, okay? That sense of belonging, that place that the Lord has called you to, it may be here, it may be somewhere else, happens only through the bond that we share in what Christ has done on behalf of us. Period. That's the way that Bonhoeffer talks about it when he's talking about the underground seminary that he had to run in World War II, when basically being an outspoken Christian that didn't support Hitler was illegal. His home was a seminary that he started. The place where he found community was with brothers and sisters fighting the good fight, keeping the faith. Belonging, peaceful existence that's possible with God that is just not possible with most other things. So this is the celebration that results. Verse 5. For as a young man marries a young woman, so shall your sons marry you. That is, you're talking to the city, the land here, that people will come back. There will be a sense of belonging. And here's the best part. As the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. My dad does wedding photography on the side of his normal job, and sometimes he needs people to help, and so I've helped him photograph a couple weddings. One of the most important pictures of a wedding is not of the bride. It's of the groom when he sees her. You have to get that picture if you're photographing a wedding, because that's one that they're all going to look for, especially her. We're going to see what the groom looks like when the bride is coming down. And when I'm at weddings, that's often what I do, even if I'm not photographing. I'm looking to see what the groom's face is. God's face when He sees us is joy. When we come into that relationship with Him, when He draws us unto Himself and He sees what that is, and He sees us as that. I've been to weddings that were like, let's get this thing over with. Let's get done, let's get out of here. It's boring. But I've been to weddings, and you have too, where it's a party, where everybody's happy to be there, and everybody is out on the dance floor, and it's great, right? There's a difference between those weddings, right? Not to say that one, well, I am saying that one's better than the other. I'm not naming any names. One's better than the other, right? Right? If we're thinking about that day, it should be a celebration, right? This is what we're talking about when we're talking about relationships here in Isaiah coming back together, but he uses the image of marriage covenant here so that we get it. We get the emotion that God feels on our behalf, and yes, I said that correctly. We get the way that God feels about us in reality. That His delight, His passion, His desire is for us to come in. That His goal, His action, His providential deliverance is to take us from something that's not worth celebrating at all into a marriage feast, into relationship, into fellowship, to belong, to be home. C.S. Lewis says, if this whole life, this place that we're in, is not our home, but it's a wandering to find that home. Should we not look forward to the arrival? Should it not be something that in every step, in every breath, in every sentence, our lips drip with the joy of telling others what he has done? Let's pray. Father, we thank you that we have something we're celebrating, that our identity does not come from the world, does not come from names that others give us. It comes from the name that you have placed upon us, the name of your Son. And we boldly claim the label of Christ follower inside and outside of this place in such a way that people see a marriage celebration everywhere we go. A divorce from the world and a marriage to you. A separation from the things that destroy and a clinging to, a bonding to what you have called us to and who you've called us to. God, I pray that in our fellowship tonight, you would be praised, that in our discussions, you would be exalted, and that our hands and feet outside of this place, you would be pleased as you are pleased with your servant. It's in your Son's name we pray these things. Amen.